We're doing day 2 of this. The first 2 problems are just review from what we did on Friday for our notes. So I'll kind of walk us through a little refresher on how to do factoring by grouping. So in the first example, we have 2x squared plus 5x plus 8x plus 20. And when we factoring by grouping, we start by grouping. We group our first 2 terms together and then our next 2 terms together. So I'm going to group this 2x squared and this 5x together, and then I'm grouping these other 2 terms. So I'm making 2 groups of 2. And then within each group, I'm factoring out a greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor between 2x squared and 5x is just an x. And then the greatest common factor between 8 and 20 would be 4. So we factor out a 4 from both of these. And then we go through the process of writing kind of each in its factored form, where we say x, parentheses, 2x plus 5. Then we have our second parentheses. We factored out a positive 4, and then we divide again. 2x plus 5, and we're looking for this match, this matching factor. That's part of our answer, and then we group together what's in red. So we call this a product of factors because 2x plus 5 is a factor that's being multiplied by our other factor, x plus 4. So that would be our final answer. We can do the same thing for the second example. Start by grouping, move on from there. So if I was to start grouping the second one, I would group together my first 2 terms and my last 2 terms. That's how we'll always do it. And then always start by finding your GCFs. In my first parentheses, my greatest common factor between 10x squared and 5x would be 5x. And then my second parentheses would be a 6 I can factor out. And I go through 5x. I do my division. I factor out a 5x. So this would be a 2x plus 1. And I factored out a positive 6. So then again, my second parentheses, 12x divided by 6 is 2x. 6 divided by 6 is positive 1. So again, we got a pair that matches, and that's good for us. So we group these 2 together. That's one of our factors. 2x plus 1. And then we write our second factor. So there we go. 2x plus 1 times 5x plus 6 would be our final answer. So in terms of steps today, there's no new steps. The only thing that we're working on is higher degree polynomials. So all the steps inside this box are the same as what we had on Friday. And the same steps I did up here in the example is we started by grouping our terms together. We divided out our greatest common factor. We check to make sure the terms match. And then we write our factors multiplied together as our product. So we're going to go through these examples now. We're going to keep all the same steps. We're just going to have to be careful. Like right away, we have an x to the third instead of an x squared. So when we start our grouping process, group the first 2, group the last 2. We already did 12 and 6. The greatest common factor is 6. But now we have x to the cube, x or x to the third, and x squared. So we have to take out the lowest term, so x squared. So our GCF is 6x squared. So that's what we divide by. 6x squared from our first group. And our second group, the greatest common factor of 14 and 7 is 7. Yes. So we divide each term by 7. Erase. Why isn't it erasing? There you go. Divide each by 7. Whoop. And whoop. And then we write out our terms. We have 6x squared, parentheses. This would be 2x plus 1. This will be factor out a positive 7. And here we have a 2x plus 1 as well. And we got our factors to match. So we factored correctly. We're on to our last step now. We're just writing our final answer as a product of our two factors. What we're going to have to start doing too now, kind of another layer to what's new today, is looking to make sure that we can't factor these parentheses anymore. And the next problem you'll see, and we'll go through that, this parentheses, inside the parentheses, you'll still be able to pull out a greatest common factor that's greater than 1. In both of these parentheses, the greatest common factor is 1, so we can't factor anymore. So this is our final answer. Because the greatest common factor of 2x and 1 is 1. The greatest common factor of 6x squared and 7 is 1. So if all your greatest common factors are just 1 at the end, you know it's fully factored. So let's do example B now. You want to try it on your own, you can work ahead. We group first two, last two. We have big numbers now, 128. Whenever I see a bigger number that I don't exactly know what the factors, like what's the greatest common factor between these two, I always just see if my smaller number can go evenly into my big number. In this case, it does. So 16x squared is going to be our GCF. And then my second parentheses, my GCF would just be 2. So if I divide this out, I have 16x squared, parentheses, x, and then this would be a minus 8. Negative 128 divided by 16 is negative 8. That's where you get that from. And then we start by going plus 2, and then factoring out our other term. This will be x minus 8. And again, we got a match. Woo! We did it. So we write out our factors. 16x squared plus 2. And then our other factor, x minus 8. All right. So now we got to stop. In this parentheses here, 16 and 2, that has a common factor of 2. So this parenthesis isn't fully factored yet. This one is, because the greatest common factor of x and 8 is 1. But here we can factor out another 2. So all we do, if we can take another step of factoring, we just say, all right, we're dividing each of these by 2, our greatest common factor again. And then we're writing this piece out as 2, writing in a factored form. So this is 8x squared plus 1. Then we just drop down what we didn't touch. So all these are being multiplied together. So this is, we have like a 2 out in front that we factored out of our parentheses here. So we have 2 times parentheses x squared, 8x squared plus 1 times parentheses x minus 8. So this would be our final fully factored answer. All right, for the rest of notes, I'm just going to do the next two problems on the front side, and then we'll be done. And that should be enough to get you started on the practice assignment for today. If you're at the point where you can go through these on your own, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, just keep following along. All right, group your first two and your last two. I'm going to pause for a second. I want everyone on their own to figure out, all right, what's my greatest common factor in my first parentheses? All right, what's your greatest common factor of your second parentheses? So do that on your own on your sheet. Give you about like 30 seconds to do that. And if you're not writing, you should be writing. All right, you can check your work off of mine. Between 12x to the third and 21x squared, your greatest common factor would be 3x squared. 3x squared. The factors of 12 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. The factors of 21 are 1, 3, 7, and 21. So 3 would be our greatest common factor. Then we take the lowest degree term, x squared. And then between 28x and 49, it would be 7. 7 divides both evenly. So we go through, write in our factored form. 3x squared parentheses x minus, this would be 7. We do the same thing for our other one, plus 7. This will be, I forgot a 4 here. 12 divided by 3 is 4x. 4x minus 7, because this one has to match. So this has to be 4x minus 7 as well. Boom and boom, we got a pair that matches. Remember, if it doesn't match, it means you probably divided wrong, or you probably pulled out the wrong greatest common factor. So we go again, we write 3x squared plus 7. And then we write the factor, our other factor, 4x minus 7. Looking at this here, greatest common factor is 1. I can't factor anymore. Greatest common factor is 1. I can't factor anymore. So then I know that this is my final answer. I give it a big old circle. All right, so for this last example, we have subtraction in front of our third term, which is kind of a special case that we talked about on Friday. So scrolling over, boop, 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 where'd you go? D. We have this subtraction here. So when we group with subtraction, we group the subtraction sign with our second group. So we just group our first two together like normal. But now we're taking this sign in with our second group. All right. So we got to divide our first group by our greatest common factor, which would be 2x squared. So I'm going to do this one just a little different so we can kind of go back to what we do when there's a negative. So I'm just going to write this factored out. 2x squared. This would be, we got 6x plus 1. Factoring out our first group. Factoring our second group, remember, we're trying to make this match. We're trying to get a factor that matches to 6x plus 1. So between 30 and 5, the greatest common factor is 5. But if we were to divide these together, we'd get a -6 and a -1, which we do not want. So remember, the rule is when you have a negative in the middle, you have to divide by the negative of your greatest common factor. So we're dividing by -5 to get our factors to match. So divide by -5, parentheses, then this would be 6x plus 1. They match together now. Boom and boom. 6x plus 1 as one of our factors. Again, we call this a product of factors. 2x squared minus 5. And then we look. Well, 6x and 1, the greatest common factor is 1. 2x squared and 5, the greatest common factor is 1. So we know this is fully factored. And then at that point, we could say we're done. Because our answers in fully factored or simplified, most simplified form, whatever you want to call it.